Hi everybody, Joe with Malarkey 365. I recently had to take a look at some data loss and therefore data loss prevention in a tenant. And so I figured I would jump in and just kind of give a basic overview of what's available in the Microsoft realm of DLP. And spoiler alert, it might not be as easy as you think, and you kind of got to watch for some stuff that you might not think about right away. So let's take a quick look at DLP. Okay, so data loss prevention, let's go through a couple of slides here. It's harder than you think. Yeah, most times when we think about data loss prevention, people think of or have an appliance mentality. And I talk about this appliance mentality often because, especially in this industry with people who are, let's say my age or around there, they have a tendency to remember the good old days when we had like this appliance sitting on the network perimeter and everything had to go through it and come through it, and you could really lock it down right there. There was all these rules, whatever, firewall, IDP systems, you name it, our email filtering, everything went through this appliance. So now people of that era tend to keep thinking like that. And it's a decades, 2 decades at this point, old way of thinking, and it really doesn't apply anymore. However, it persists because companies who are marketing to CISOs, how old are CISOs? They are marketing toward that mentality. When you hear the SASE or SSE, Secure Service Edge, the whole idea is, we're going to put everything in this containerized cloud space. It's like an appliance in the sky, and everything goes through that. And they can do a little bit of a job there, but they can't account for everything. People go around that stuff all the time. So we'll hit on a couple of those things as we go through this. I'm going to put on my necessary prescription glasses. They're not prescription. So, and by the way, I keep going back and forth between my camera. The Macintosh camera actually has pretty good white balance. I got another camera, and the stupid thing would just be way too red, and I couldn't. On a Macintosh, you can't really control the white balance on it, which annoyed the hell out of me. I don't know, I can do plugins and whatnot, but come on, I should be able to do that if I buy an expensive camera. So anyway, probably going to get another camera, but for now, honestly, the Macintosh camera, not too bad. All right, so we're going to talk about a few things, and let me go through the slides because obviously I did not make an agenda slide. Oopsies. So the Microsoft Cloud DLP, we'll talk about that. Yes, Microsoft Location, SharePoint, and Exchange. Then we'll talk about Endpoint DLP. It's important, and I don't see a lot of companies using it because it's a little difficult. And then we'll talk about, well, what else is there? Well, we got to talk about Intune or some kind of device management because we're syncing stuff to these devices. These devices are what people are using to connect to our services. Can they just use any old device? And then we'll also talk about Defender for Cloud Apps, the CASB from Microsoft, and how that plays into devices and device control and endpoint. So devices are a big part of this. So we'll talk about that. So let's get into it. Microsoft 365 DLP. Well, this is what most people think of when they say, we want to turn on Microsoft DLP. They're thinking about the cloud DLP, things leaving the cloud, not me sitting at a Windows device and directly uploading something to, I don't know, some file server somewhere in some other company, or uploading stuff to my personal Box account. They're not thinking of that right away. They're also not thinking of me maybe copying stuff to a USB drive, making a direct copy of everything on my hard drive to an external hard drive. They're not thinking about anything like that. They're just thinking about, or even, Dropbox, Box, or any of these other things. Well, what about stuff that's up there? Can we control that at all? So mostly they're they're talking about the Microsoft locations. And honestly, that is 95% of your worry is right from there. And that's how most people start thinking about it. So this covers email messages leaving the company via exchange, right? Texts in the email itself, in the body of the email itself, in the subject, whatever. And also physical attachments, the old school style of attachment. I attach a file to exchange, and depending on how I do it, it'll default to just a physical copy. Sometimes, though, you might see the choice, hey, you want to, if it's in your OneDrive, for instance, it'll ask you, you want to just put a OneDrive shared link there, or do you actually want a copy of the file? So, but Exchange handles, the copies of the file. It'll look at that stuff and see what's in it. Right? Is it labeled a certain way? Does it have credit cards in it? Do we have DLP policies that block that? All right, so that's the one thing DLP in the cloud covers. The other thing is SharePoint to a very large degree. SharePoint itself, the libraries, data, whatever, and anything that's in there, we can put a DLP in. It could be just a table that has a bunch of credit cards on it. We try to give access to a guest account, and they come in. If there's like a bunch of credit cards, we can block that. So it's really access control. Shh, it's access control, but it's in the form of DLP policies. We can just say, well, there's too much of this company information or personal information or financial information, so we got to block that from being shared with guests outside the company. And then that's our DLP rule, for example. It also covers OneDrive. Why? We all know why. OneDrive is a site collection within SharePoint. So, of course, it covers that as well. Some parts of Teams, I throw this in there. Includes private chat documents. If you drop them in there, normally those don't go outside the company. But I always want to remind people that when you drop a file into a chat, if I have a meeting or with somebody or a chat with somebody, I drop a file in there, it actually goes into a space on my OneDrive called Chats. I always forget the name of it, but anyway, it's actually a copy. It's not the original. Now I could share a copy from my OneDrive, and that's a link that I would send to somebody. It's a different thing though. If I just drag a file into a chat, it assumes that I want to put that file into the chat as a physical file and actually makes a copy of it. You've probably seen this. If you do it again a second time, Teams will say, hey, I already got a copy of this. Do you want to replace the original, or do we make another copy? Blah, blah, blah. And that's what it's telling you. All right. And then also Teams, of course, because Teams, if you click on the File tab, that's a pointer to a library in SharePoint. Right? Any file that you put into Teams is in a SharePoint library. All right. So it covers sharing of that stuff. And then also, if you have an E5 license, you can also cover text in Teams. So when you're looking at locations, which I'm not going to get into demos today, but if you look at locations in the cloud-based data loss prevention from Microsoft, you'll see Teams there. And the first thing that people think of when they see that is, oh, it's all my Teams files. Nope, those aren't your Teams files. Teams means mainly the chat stuff, because that's not stored in SharePoint where the other files are. That's in an Azure service that's migrated over the last 5 years or so. But that's what that really refers to. All right, that's easy enough, but that doesn't account for everything, right? One big thing it doesn't account for is, what about all those files that are on your device, on Windows, Macintosh, even phones, what about all that stuff? Well, Microsoft has something for those as well. It's called Endpoint DLP. When they first came out with it a couple years ago, it was for Windows. Now it's Macintosh is drawn in. And I'm just going to hit the high points of this. But the high points are that it can control, what's the word I'm looking for? Actions that you take from your laptop, for instance, like USB transfer. So instead of saying like a cloud-based DLP that says, well, if there's 50 credit cards, then we prevent you from sharing those or sending those, through email outside of the company. We make that kind of a rule up, and that logically, that makes all the sense in the world. On a device, though, it's a different action. It's copying that same thing, let's say a file, a Word document or otherwise, that has 50 credit cards on it or an Excel file, to a USB drive. Not blocking everything that goes to USB, but blocking anything that matches our DLP conditions. Okay. Now we could block everything that goes to USB. We should probably block a bit of that, certain things via Intune. We can put out blocking policies. So, but anyway, this is just only blocking certain things. That's what makes endpoint DLP so great. And again, this is an E5 security E5 license feature. You don't get this with the regular E3. All right. Web uploads is another thing. Direct web uploads. Now, the first time I say web uploads, everyone thinks, well, that's the KSB's job, right? Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps is Microsoft's name for that. Now, it used to be MKS or MKSB, which it was a much better name. But in comes the Defender line of products. The branding, as Microsoft is wont to do, is changing the branding, and now everything's got to have the word Defender in front of it. Now we get confusing things like Defender for Cloud Apps, which is KSB. So we're not talking about that. This is independent of KSB. We're telling the device what it can and cannot do. So now we're going to tell it, well, anything that's got 50 credit cards or anything that we've labeled, for instance, we're not talking about labeling, but everybody knows a little bit about labeling. If we've labeled a file, confidential, internal only, whatever, these are conditions that we can use both in the cloud and also endpoint DLP. We can say, well, anything with 50 credit cards, okay, that matches our DLP. We're not going to let that get uploaded to certain places. That can't go to Box, or that can't go to Dropbox or Salesforce or wherever. Right? We're gonna block those uploads. We're not gonna block all uploads to those things. It just those things. All right. Now the subtle difference. Why isn't this CASB? Well, CASB would be a situation where we've connected. Let's use Box as an example. We've connected Box with SSO for Entra. So now people use their tenant Microsoft IDs to sign in through a My Apps app, right? A chiclet, whatever you want to call it. That brings them to Box. Great. Now, we have single sign-on, conditional access, all those things. On top of that, we can connect another connection, a second connection, our CASB, Defender for Cloud Apps. We can connect that to Box. Yeah. Now we can control to a very good degree stuff going in and out of Box. We can use DLP. We can even have DLP go up and say, hey, what's already there? Any credit cards already up in Box? Ooh, that's not good. Let's quarantine those or delete those. That's not what I'm talking about here. Because what doesn't that account for? That doesn't account for people signing into Box from their Windows corporate device using some other non-company owned domain, maybe Outlook.com account, Gmail, whatever. There's nothing stopping them from going direct to Box, grabbing a file that's on their device, and uploading it to Box out of band. Not using their company domain name, just completely out circumventing everything. Well, that's where endpoint DLP comes from. It can see all the files that are on the hard drive, and if I tried to take one of those and upload it, it could stop me. What stops me? What part of Windows or Macintosh actually stops me? It's the browsers. So the browsers have to play ball with this. Not every browser can. Edge, Chrome, and Firefox can. Okay. What if somebody uses a third-party browser outside of that? Oh, it's Safari too on the Mac. Well, what if somebody uses, I don't know, Brave or whatever, something outside of that? Well, that's also part of Endpoint DLP. We block those browsers from accessing the files in the first place. We don't let them even access a file that matches a DLP condition. Forget about where it's going to go. If it just matches any DLP condition, then those browsers are blocked. Okay, that works. But there's other stuff. There's these sync apps. You sign up for a Google Drive or buy whatever else. You get an app that you can install on your device. You point it at a folder and say, anything in this folder, just automatically in the background sync that stuff up to, Box. That doesn't go through a browser session. Okay, so once again, we can't let those sync apps touch those files. And that's another thing that we can do. We can block sync apps from touching those files. So now you get the idea. It's really, we're forcing users into really using browsers to do this. So if you ever do implement this, be aware that you're changing things significantly from the user's point of view. And that's going to require a little bit of training, a little bit of reworking what's on the device, possibly just removing those sync apps because they're just going to be problems at that point. But Endpoint DLP for Windows and Mac can do that for you. All right, let's move on. What do we need for that to work, or for everything really to work? Our extra security, because devices now are a huge part. We can't have somebody logging into Office 365 with their children's TikTok infested, machine because I left mine at the office. I'll just boot up Susie's and I'll get on it. We can't let that happen. So we got to have some control over the devices to some degree that connect. So to do any of the stuff that I just mentioned, in fact, Endpoint DLP, those devices, Mac and Windows, they got to be onboarded to MDE. Yeah, MDE, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. I'm not talking about Defender for Endpoint. I'm talking about the Purview, Endpoint DLP. Yeah, onboarding them is the same thing. Yeah, you onboard to one, you onboard to the other. So you're going to onboard them to MDE. It requires the same license, the E5 license. So you're good either way. You don't have to use the Defender for Endpoint stuff. You don't have to, use Defender, Windows Defender, antivirus. It's not required, but you are required to do this part. Get them onboarded. All right. Because that allows the device to have all these rules sent down to it, and it allows the device to understand those and whatnot. Extensions for non-Edge browsers. Yeah, remember that stuff I just talked about? Well, Edge, Firefox, Chrome, those browsers know how to do stuff. Well, not really. We got to tell them how to do stuff, and we do that through extensions that we can install via Intune, right? Both on Windows and on the Mac, different ways to do it. And then compliance. Compliance is big, right? How do we know and how do we block devices that we don't like? How do we know devices are good when they connect? And how do we allow them to do stuff? And how do we not allow other things? We've talked about this in the past. It's really compliance. Compliance serves two purposes. One, we get to check to see if the machine is at a level that we allow to access our stuff. Is there an antivirus running? Is it updated, for instance? But also, in order for a device to become compliant, it must enroll with Intune. It must be a controlled device. That's required because compliance is inside of Intune. So it also allows us to say, well, these devices for sure they're managed. So we trust those. Devices that are not in Intune are not managed. Great. And we use that in conditional access policies. So let's talk a little bit more about the device control and Intune MDM and also MAM. I haven't talked about phones yet, iOS, Android. Well, we've talked about this in other videos. Yes, that your DLP extends to phones mainly via mobile application management, the MAM channel, which can be used on personal phones. It marks files that come from our Office 365 onto the phones. These aren't browser-based apps that are doing the syncing. They could use a browser. They got to use Edge, though, because Edge knows how to do this on the phones. Probably, though, they're not going to use that because things get tiny. So they use things like the Outlook, for mobile Outlook, mobile Office, mobile Teams, things like that. And these are all apps that are aware of what they're supposed to do. They encrypt files on the phone. They make sure that information from company information from those apps aren't copied to non-controlled apps on the phone, and non-enlightened apps, if you want to use that term. And then we can wipe our company data from the phone without wiping anything else on the phone. So man is there for phones. And I say that because most phone devices these days are users' personal devices. That's just the way it is, but this is a way to control that. Bring your own personal device laptop restrictions. Yeah, we should restrict those, right? And that's what we've been talking about. That's the compliance thing, really. But there's another way to do it. Windows has MAM. Windows MAM. Sounds great. Well, MAM for Windows? Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Let's go start using that. And then I can control all the data on Windows like I can on iOS or Android. Well, yeah, but the only app right now that is compatible with that is Microsoft Edge. That's it, just a browser, and it's got to be that browser. So that kind of takes the bloom off the rose a little bit. You got to tell everybody, okay, well, see, here's what you're going to end up having to do. You can use Edge only on your personal device. You could do that. It works great. It's got some nice things like blocking copy and paste you can also do, which is kind of nice. But probably you're going to end up creating a couple of conditional access policies that say this. If your device is compliant, meaning we control it, you have full access to your Office 365, for instance. If your device is not compliant, if it can't get to be compliant, it's probably your personal device. Then we block all sync apps, any desktop app on your device from connecting to our Office 365, so you can't sync stuff. We force you into a browser experience. And then we block downloads from Exchange and SharePoint, which is Teams and OneDrive and whatnot. Now, that's a good starter set. But we have a third option for both of those, Defender for Cloud apps. Again, that's an advanced license as well to actually make it do something. There's two parts of Defender for Cloud apps, the KSB. Discovery, which is really an E3 license. And that's just seeing what SaaS apps somebody uses and doing stuff, policies that actually take some action. Well, now you need the big boy license. All right. Well, Defender for Cloud apps, you also can control access from personal and company-based devices, but not just to Microsoft 365. Now it extends to any other SaaS app that, again, we have onboarded and that we control. Okay, and you should be doing that. Yes, and we should encourage everybody. We use our box, not your own. And if you use your own, well, we're going to fix it such that you're not going to be able to copy our important confidential company info up to yours. We're going to block that through endpoint DLP. So we encourage people to use the company-based box, Dropbox, whatever. Of course, that's what they should be using. They shouldn't be using anything else anyway. All right. Well, Defender for Cloud apps can help us with that. We can create policies, session policies, browser-based. Anything really that we want to super control has to be browser-based at this point because the apps themselves, they're all over the road. They bypass the proxying of the cloud app security broker. Can't really control them, but we can control some parts of it. Again, endpoint DLP, or we could just block access completely from personal devices, which would block everything. So, but we're very limited. So I just want to throw that in there because that is another option, and you can bring in the SaaS apps for that kind of control. All right, Intune compliance and or ownership. That decides whether a device is under our control or not. Yeah, throw ownership in there as an option. Ownership just is a feature, a property of a device in Intune. I can flip it to one way or the other as I like. So if I do that, if I use that, that's the kind of the poor man's compliance. It doesn't really check anything, right? It's just a property, but you've got to have your device into Intune in order for that property to show up. And then that property is one of the properties that gets copied to Entra. And then we can use Entra conditional access policies for that, just like we can with compliance. But again, I prefer compliance. Strict control of Intune devices really is a must for a couple of reasons. Number one, we got to send policies down to them. We got to onboard them, which these are all done via Intune. But also, we want to make sure that people aren't enrolling their personal devices into Intune. Why? Because they could accidentally become compliant. They could accidentally have their ownership set to company. Somebody could just do it, by accident. So, and if we're not paying attention with hundreds or thousands of devices, that gets pretty easy to happen. And then all of a sudden, these devices are allowed to use sync apps. It's a whole different game. Now they can, their device has all their OneDrive stuff on it. A year of their email or more synced to Outlook. They leave the company, they leave with all that information. So we have to make sure that we're blocking that. We've done other videos on that. That's through enrollment policies for Windows, also Mac, really anything. We should be blocking personal devices. Sometimes that's not so easy. Macintosh, the only good way to do that is if you have ABM, Apple Business Manager, you purchase your Macintoshes via that, and then you connect that to Intune, because pretty much everything else is a personal enrollment, and we can't be blocking that. If we don't have ABM, we can't block personal enrollment, so it gets a little dicey. But there's ways to fix that. Now we make sure that Macintoshes do have the company ownership, and we have to physically flip that. So again, extra work there. Better way is to set up ABM. Just bite the bullet and set that up the first time. It's not too hard, and it really does give you a lot better control. All right, so block personal Windows enrollments. This is through device enrollment restrictions policies. There's a few weird things in Intune. That's one of them. And we can block all personal or just personal Windows, personal Mac, whatever we want. Preferably, we block any kind of personal, but I'll leave that up to you. At least Windows, because autopilot is pretty mature at this point, and that's how machines can come in. That's considered a business or a corporate company-owned enrollment. ABM is basically autopilot for Macintosh. Well, that's pretty much all I want to get into. We've talked about really where you want to start, the cloud stuff, obviously, figure out what you can do in there. But things go beyond that. This is just really the basics. Now we can look at, Power BI stuff. We can look at stuff in Azure through, the data map, through schematized assets, stuff in databases. It goes well beyond what we're talking about, but these are the basics where you want to start, and then you can move from there once you get your sea legs. Okay. Well, that's it for now. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.